Welcome back to Community Conflict. I am happy once again to have yet another alumni of our program here. And I'm particularly happy that Steve could join us because I know several of you have chosen just policing and police community relations as your focus for community conflict. I'm going to let Steve introduce himself and what he does, and then we're going to start a dialogue about policing in modern times. It's specifically in Los Angeles, one of the most challenging cities of the world. And we'll see where this goes. Thank you, Steve, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's great you can be here. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Maybe say a little bit about when you graduated, what you appreciated about NCRP.
Well, my name is Stephen Katz. I'm a 2005 graduate of the master's program here at Cal State Dominguez Hills of the Negotiation and Conflict Management.
Yes, it had a different name.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, it did change
Yes.
right after I
Yeah.
was here. But professionally, I'm a police officer with the City of Los Angeles, LAPD. I've been a police officer 32 years.
Wow.
And one of the benefits that I gained from my experience here at Cal State Dominguez Hills was really bringing my being able to use that not only academically, but to use it at work every day because conflict is there and it's helped. I think it's important. I think that it could help future officers coming on, officers that are on the department now, deal with conflict because it's something that we're going to deal with every day.
Well, they deal with the worst of
Right.
conflict every day. And I don't know if most of you know, because we don't talk about our history, how old is NCRP if we go back to the conflict management program? I'm not sure, but it was created as a program to serve the educational needs of law enforcement
Yes.
in the Los Angeles, South Bay, Southern California region. So Steve represents our roots. And having taught many officers over the years, I wholeheartedly agree with him. I was just saying, the best of officers I've taught, and that includes when I taught BART training up in San Francisco, here, around the country. The very best, if you've ever studied hostage negotiations, you'll see it. They are masters of NCRP.
Right.
And that just needs to spread throughout all of our forces. But what challenging times we live in with community police relations. I hope you don't mind if I ask about the Black Lives Matter movement.
No, not at all.
How do you see all of this the last how many years? It's been 3, 4. I mean, police brutality, targeting, profiling has been a lifetime. I've lived through it too. But in the last few years, things have just really become more public, more visible.
Well, I think, one thing, I have lived in the Los Angeles community, the African American community my whole life.
Yes.
So although I am a police officer, I'm a stakeholder too.
Yes. You're a community member as well.
Absolutely.
Do we ever think that our police officers are members of our community's
Well,
neighbors? Yes, it's true.
It's easy to see that the public would not think that way.
Yes.
But I think with social media, with more video available now, the interactions between law enforcement and the public are more visible now. So,
absolutely. No, the use of cameras, the police force use of cameras,
Right.
and the citizen use of camera, absolutely.
So I think that's brought the emphasis on police community relations to the forefront. Of course, there are some negative aspects about that. What I would say from the law enforcement side, and what we can gain from conflict resolution, is to look at things, say, from a standpoint theory, where we all...
Go ahead, introduce that to the students. I don't know if they've studied it.
So standpoint theory is something that I learned in this program, and where the tenets of standpoint theory is basically is that we all bring experience from our life, political, social, and economical experiences to our life to an event. And what you try to do in standpoint theory is step in another person's shoes that you are maybe in this conflict with.
Yes.
Where you can have some understanding, some shared ground to get you past a point where you can get through the conflict. Because if you stand on each side and you're not seeing the other person's point of view, you're never going to resolve the conflict.
No, you can't build rapport.
Right.
And you may have studied this as perspective taking, as empathy. You have studied this in our program because it's true. It's fundamental to the best of negotiating, mediating, is that you gather information about the other person and you have accurate insight about who they are and what motivates them. Yes, that's sort of the first steps. You know, what concerns me, I'll tell you, I'm not law enforcement, though I have worked a lot with military and law enforcement. The whole gun lobby, gun situation, I have worked with school violence. Columbine, you know, it's no matter where, it's tragic. As a police officer, I would think it's becoming more challenging, more threatening, because this country just seems to have this insane desire to arm itself, not just with simple protection or for hunting, which I grew up with, but with military-like, you know, gang kind of weaponry. How does that impact the police day to day from your experience perspective? Now, maybe you've lived with it your whole life, so you're like, well, that's just part of the job.
Well, it is what we or police officers look at when they are encountering situations when they want to be safe.
Right.
So they're looking to see if there is a potential for the individuals that they're dealing with to be armed, and if so, then proceed with caution. So I think from a law enforcement point of view, safety is always prevalent. Now, if you're dealing with a situation, say, if we had an open carry law here in California, like in other states in
like
Arizona and
Texas,
Texas, that does pose a very real problem for law enforcement, because you may encounter someone, say, on maybe just a dispute at a public setting.
Right,
and then
a
both parties
restaurant.
have guns. You see where this can transcend to something very deadly. So
For
it changes
everybody.
Exactly.
Even if nobody is thinking of it or planning on it.
Absolutely.
Just talk about the worst of conflict and misunderstanding, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I try to put myself in the shoes of law enforcement, envisioning what it's like to see somebody waving something that they think might be a weapon.
Right.
Because you are at risk in these situations. And I tend to be an inclusive, everybody's life matters. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that in our thinking, and one thing that several managers have expressed, and what I've heard is that many times we're trained as police officers to how to deal with lethal force when it is presented to you.
Right.
But I think another thing that should be emphasized and is to talk about how to de-escalate situations versus escalating situations.
Right.
And part of that is around conflict resolution.
Oh, sure.
How do you deal with someone? How do you speak with someone to not heighten the situation?
No, to calm them and reassure them, and
Right.
while understanding who they are. Yes, that
Absolutely.
is fundamental NCRP.
Yes.
Now, we don't have enough time today, really, because there's lots of questions I'm sure students have.
Sure.
Do you mind if I know I've connected you with at least two in my classes who care about community police relations? Is that okay if
Sure.
any of them want to connect
Absolutely.
with you? Good. We've talked about spreading NCRP education throughout law enforcement officers to enhance community officer relations. Other things you see happening in LA or across the country that you think are promising, are working, or things that you see not happening that you would propose could help with building more of, a bridge.
Well, I think that the tenets, particularly that we learned here in our program here at Cal State Dominguez Hills, could be beneficial to our newer officers coming on to the department, where they
Yes.
learn that. But as also, not only that, but as a continuing education component, where it's
Right.
not just presented to our newer officers, but officers that are still working, may have a couple of years in the field.
Sure.
It's always good to have a refresher on, because sometimes what I've seen is that it's easy to get a jaded view at times. Say if you're dealing with, you see a lot of negative things.
Right, the
say
worst
this line
of
work.
criminal behavior. I
So-
feel similarly
Right.
as a former litigator. You see the worst of human nature.
Right.
Yes.
So I think it's important to maybe center yourself a little more, and training through the NCRP program is one aspect that can get us to have some understanding with the individuals that we deal with.
Well, and I would say, having taught that type of continuing ed training to officers, having a group of officers in a room together who have like 2-3 years experience or more, they have incredibly rich case study experience of what
Right.
worked and what didn't work to share with each other. And it's like being a mediator. It's a lifelong learning, right?
Absolutely.
We have our strengths and our weaknesses. If you can create a safe space for officers to even evaluate each other in a very collegial, let's lift each other up way, where
Absolutely.
everybody has weaknesses, not just a couple, it can really help with doing that reflective practice. But also, it's just nice to have a break, right?
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
a refreshing, rejuvenating kind of, break from the job.
Yeah, when you can dialogue with your peers,
Yes.
talk about shared experiences or different experiences and how one person dealt with it and how another person dealt with it, or you can speak about, well, maybe we could have dealt with it in a different way.
Yes, really.
Right.
Do that really honest, soul-searching kind of reflective practice. Now, Steve came to one of my classes years back, one of my ethics classes, to talk about speaking truth to power within his force. And so I'm going to be asking him a bit about current state of racism in this country, where this is community conflict. Now,
Yes.
I'll tell you, before this became such a public debate, public issue, for years my colleagues and friends of color, and not just officers, social workers, child welfare workers, they would take me into their neighborhoods to show me how they get followed by police. When I get a free card, I get free passage when I'm not with a friend of color, right? And I actually had one student here whose father was a sergeant, police sergeant, who got apprehended by LAPD and ridden around in a car for hours without cause. I mean, so I've heard this. And I had a good friend who was a Harvard-educated lawyer. He was an Obama. And I had to intervene with the police because the neighbors had called the police on him. He hadn't done a thing. So I've been aware for a while. My African-American parents, especially mothers, have said to me over and over, oh my God, my son, my daughter has to be, especially my son, has to be perfect, and they're still at risk when they're walking in their community because they just get prejudged. Racism is right there. Have things changed, or are we just becoming more aware?
I would like to think that things have changed for the better, but I think things can always be better. Here's, as a stakeholder living in the community that I live in, this is what I look for from the police, is that we all want to live in a safe environment. We want to live in an environment that is as free of crime as possible. That's what I look for from the police. What I also look for from the police is that if I call you, I'd like you to come in a timely manner.
Right.
And lastly, when I have inner dealings with you, I like to be respected.
Yes.
The bottom line.
No, those are bottom lines.
Speaking to those issues, we do still have a ways to go with that.
How do you evaluate that with your officers? That's fascinating to me because I'll tell you, members, people I know living in poor communities will often say, well, now if they're illegal immigrants, they don't call the police, right? They don't want to risk deportation. But otherwise, they may call the police and they don't show, or they show up 2 hours later.
Right.
You never hear that. I've never heard it in an affluent, white, suburban area. You know, the police, they're right there. So how do you do sort of random?
Well, basically with me is I have dialogue with my officers, but the perception that the police get there faster in more affluent areas, the calls for service aren't as high as say in the business areas.
And
so
there's more police
that'll
per
give the
person,
perception
yes.
of officers getting there faster. But what I try to do is just speak with my fellow officers and say, here's how I feel. But more importantly, as in my everyday dealings, I think the issue that we have is the number of particularly African American officers on our police force. They are dwindling. Our numbers are extremely low.
Okay.
So my talking point or selling point is to individuals that are interested is why wouldn't you want to have someone that looks like you working in your community?
Right. Who cares about your community? Who lives in your community? Yes.
But there is I see as the problem there is that is police and community relations, particularly in the African American community, that is a that can be a chasm for people thinking about entering a career in law enforcement.
Well, it was similar for me as a woman becoming a lawyer. And I'll tell you, I rejected engineering straight out. I excelled at math and physics. My father's an engineer. I said, no, it's a male-dominated profession. I'm not interested.
Right.
Law, when I was leaving my litigation firm to pursue my practice with mediation and all, people would come to me and say, you know, as a woman, you can change this for the better within. And I said at the time, the cost is too high. This is not, you know.
Right.
So I do understand. We're facing a similar situation with faculty of color in academia.
Right.
It's hard to recruit because they're like, geez, we don't get rewarded. Discrimination still exists. We go through all this work and we don't get treated fairly. Yeah.
Right.
So we hurt our own institutions by not cleaning it up within. Yeah.
And you know, we talked about, and when I talked about in your ethics class about speaking truth to power is working from within to change the department, particularly with the police department, can be challenging.
Yeah.
Because you know, we are a quasi-military organization.
Right.
And, you know,
well,
change
for
is
good
not always
reason.
easy.
No, it's very hard. Law enforcement and military, actually, there are some real reasons that task comes before relationship. But this is the flip side.
Right.
If you get a poor leader in place or you have a problem and you need change, navigating every NCRP student who's either in military or law enforcement reports this challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, very complicated. You might be misperceived, judged
Right.
as disloyal.
And then ostracized for speaking against
Right.
the department.
Right. In-out group dynamics happen
Right.
quite a bit, the worst of groupthink.
Right.
Another reason to have NCRP education. No,
Absolutely.
it's not easy. I was just suggesting to my public policy class that having government ONSPAs, impartial investigators who fields consumer citizen complaint, it's sort of like the impartial citizen oversight boards with police, but more a professional oversight, not just
Right.
a citizen. It's critical right now because reforming government, we all need to take responsibility. We can't just put it on a few people's shoulders. And I would say, as an African American in the force, as a woman in academia, oftentimes people look to, excuse the language, but the minorities to
Right.
fix the system.
Right.
And we're lucky to even be there, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, that is, we've had to face a lot of discrimination to get there. And I would say, you know, if we could build networks like law enforcement, military officers, military troops who are NCRP people. We could maybe provide some alumni networks to help with some of the big systemic issues, because they can't be tackled by one individual or a few individuals alone. You look at the US right now with law enforcement, really needs to be systemic. And I don't see people taking that lead, frankly. I don't see the president, his attorney general, some of the people you would hope. I just don't see it, and I'm disappointed. I do believe we could be doing more.
I couldn't disagree with you on that. There does need to be more collaboration with those that are from within the organization to help change the organization for better.
Yeah, and the profession for better, and
Absolutely.
all of it, the norms, the in-out group stuff, yeah. Well, we have a few more minutes. I want to ask you about the violence in America, because I was just in Rio de Janeiro. I don't know if you know, I was a Fulbright Distinguished Chair
I do
in
know
Brazil. And the urban violence there is some of the worst in the world. It didn't feel all that different. I was also going to the West Bank in the Middle East, and my university was really concerned about the violence there. And I said, well, I'm sorry. Where I live in Long Beach, something could happen.
Right.
That's the reality of living where we live. And then the Paris attack, and we lost a CSU student in Paris, France.
Yes.
It's just not how we envision it. But in the midst of all this, my country does appear to have sort of this passionate, odd, disturbing relationship with violence. And as a officer, in law enforcement, you see it. What do you think about, I know you love our country, and so do I do. And that's why I'm asking, what could we do as communities to tackle some of what's going on with violence?
Well, I think engaging our youth in positive programs, particularly
like sports. You coach sports, I know. Yes.
Coaching sports, but not only that, the benefits of a good education, and it's got to start early, whether it's sports, whether it's after school programs, but to start it, say, in middle school, I think it'd be too late.
It is too late in middle school now. I've worked with these kids, and right now you got to start around 8, 9.
Right.
When you look at gang intervention, Paramount is a program that one of our alumni was studying its success.
Right.
They brought parents in to say, you can't pretend that your children, because they're still young, cute, are not being engaged by people on the streets. You have to be aware. Yeah, I would say 8, 9, at least in our community. But the value of an education, we should be starting as early as possible, because if a family has not benefited from education, they need a lot of help with changing that family future.
And it's hard if it's not supported at home.
Yes.
So that's where I think the programs have to be that much more stronger. Outreach to the parents, outreach not only to the kids, but to the parents to help sustain it once it's brought home, because, if it's not sustained at home,
well, parents
it's
are
hard.
the best teachers.
Right.
They are the most important teachers. My mother was a teacher. I was very blessed to have parents who helped us with homework every night. I agree.
Right.
If it's not, though, we have to figure out ways to provide that support for young people, because our communities are dangerous.
And another thing is that because California is so multicultural now, is individuals understanding each other also. Latino and Black relations. We talk about Black-white relations, but I think that's a very important component too. Is because we're neighbors everywhere we go, and it can't always. We have to learn to understand each other, get along with each other, and
as human beings, rather than prejudice, images, what we've been told. No, students sometimes will come into NCRP classrooms and say, wow, I was not raised to think this way about you
Right.
because I never had a chance to meet you,
Right.
to engage. That is critically important. I would say you just named one of the most troubling dynamics in Southern California that I've seen. But I'm sure there are several out there. I'm just not that aware. I know when I was in San Francisco, the Asian gangs, I was surprised, but the
Right.
Chinese, Vietnamese were as forceful, and these were adult gangs that were recruiting children, right? Just like
Right.
that was my concern.
Yeah, in Southern California it may not be as prevalent, but the detectives that work for me, I'm a homicide supervisor. We just had an Asian gangs related homicide, so they are there.
Yes.
And of course, when we talk about in our society, again, we can come back to the prevalence of firearms.
Right.
I mean, when you look at studies of other countries where firearms aren't as prevalent as they are here, of course, their violence rate and their homicide rates are way lower than ours. I
no
mean, there's a direct
question.
correlation.
So much lower that
Right.
that's part of why I'm asking you. What is it with Americans needing not just to own hunting rifles? I have no problem with that. Canadians do that. I mean,
Yeah.
lots of the world does that. Or even some basic, simple protection that they lock up away
Right.
from their kids. What is it with? It seems like the military-industrial complex, the people who profit from selling these militia kind of weapons are once again in the middle of it.
Well, I mean, the spin on how you interpret the Constitution and the Second Amendment
Right.
is it's how you look at it. Do we need assault rifles in our homes? I don't think so. I don't think that is necessary in our society. The other side would say, well, look at the violent things that have happened in our societies, like San Bernardino and Columbine,
Right.
and stuff like that. So.
Well, let me say something, because I was close to Columbine. Some of my students were part of Columbine. Columbine actually, now this is a discussion to have with law enforcement. This was one of the first big school tragedies in the States. And the
Right.
law enforcement in this town outside of Denver had been studying these kids who had been bullied in their school. And, they were the odd ducks. It's a pretty predictable pattern.
So it's a bully. You have to deal with bullying too.
Bullying was right at the heart of it,
Right.
and adults not being willing to step in and negotiate some moral norms about how students respect each other.
Right.
But the signs were there, and they were discounted. I don't think we're doing that the way they did then, because there was a case file that went back years with Columbine. Now, San Bernardino, I must say, somebody I just imagine my own workplace, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, it's a horrible tragedy, but they did not know their fellow worker beneath the
No.
surface. I mean, maybe the family didn't know him either, so but we just need to somehow know each other. And I've known enough Muslims in this country who feel prejudiced, who feel like they're on the outside looking in. Nobody has accepted them.
Right.
To wonder how our youth feel when that's just the repeated message that you're in the promised land kind of
Right.
golden opportunity, but you're not invited to the table.
Right.
It's a bit like I imagine some of what's happening in Europe right now. You're breeding these groups of alienated, angry young men.
You're marginalizing a segment of society.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it's not beneficial.
Not
at
to
all.
anybody. No,
Right.
we're losing their potential too. Well, thank you again. Our time is up for today, but I think you'll probably be hearing from more of our students, because we could probably have a course on police community relations in NCRP. It's one of those topics that's really timely and so important. Anything you want to say?
Well,
A few closing remarks. Yeah.
I appreciate you having me here, Professor Erb. You were always one of my favorite instructors
Well,
here and
thank
there,
you.
and I'm
Yes.
glad that.
I didn't pay him to do this. Yes.
No, not at all. It's my pleasure, and I think it's important that police community relations are improved because it's for the betterment of the society that we live in. And like I said, I look at it from both ends because I am one of the stakeholders. I'm on both sides.
Right.
And I am invested to hopefully make a positive change. So thank you for having me
Yes.
here today.
No, we all deserve to be safe, to feel safe. That's the mission here. Okay. Thank you all. Have a great week.